And then there were 10. After 2 decades of gaming, I can safely say the last 10 years has hit time and time again with masterpieces at a rate I never anticipated. Before we begin, it's worth mentioning that while I know rankings lead to excitement over the number of value I assign to each game, I hope my commentary shines through in a way that conveys how I feel about each of the games I feature. For example, if you were saddened by Dark Souls Spot in Part 2, I suggest forgetting about its placement for a moment and focusing on my commentary. If you do, I feel the intense adoration I have for it is readily apparent. I was thrilled to hear from so many Skyward Sword fans and felt represented in my brief analysis, and I heard you loud and clear on The Witcher 3. You've all encouraged me to find time to revisit the game and try its DLCs for the first time, perhaps with some dedicated content down the line. With that said, today's emphasis is on the final 10 that remain. Here are my top 10 best games of the 2010s. Number 10, Fire Emblem 3 Houses. My choice for 2019's Game of the Year is also my personal biggest surprise in the top 10. Outside of Smash Brothers, my introduction to Fire Emblem was through Awakening on the 3DS, which is fantastic in its own right. I didn't enjoy Fates nearly as much, so my expectations for 3 Houses were middling at best. On a whim, I decided to buy it from the eShop in the hopes it would be a return to form. What followed was an absolute devastation of my time and attention for the next 3 weeks. Over that time, I sunk in 150 hours into 4 playthroughs of the game, and if you can believe it, I was tempted to start a 5th. If you've seen my best bosses of the decade, you've gotten a taste of the admiration that catapulted all of my free time into Garrick Mach and its ensemble of lovable characters, particularly the Golden Deers. Though I can't deny my blood runs gold, 3 Houses' strength is the overarching narrative that evolves as you experience each of its routes, each feeling like a piece of an excellent collective journey. Going through the initial chapters on repeat can be a bit tedious, but the variety in characters and the relationships that surround them add enough intrigue to keep it engaging. In the same vein, the combat and strategy system is rather straightforward, but manages to remain mighty entertaining beyond the 100-hour mark. I think what makes 3 Houses such a success is the perfect balance it strikes between its 2 major elements. The management of your house, character classes, skills, inventories, the relationships that deepen over time through meals shared, tragedies and triumphs endured, and even simple class time all give emotional weight to the strategic combat maps. Playing in classic mode with permadeath provides stakes that feel catastrophic in the face of all the bonding you do outside of battle. You want to win for the sake of the narrative, but also to push for a safe world for you and those you've come to adore. It's rare that a game has made me reflect on war to the degree that 3 Houses did. Characters like Dorothea in particular are affected heavily by the brutality of facing off against those who were once considered allies, but there was something real about this sorrow that resonated with me and made the final chapters a bittersweet tour of duty. All of this is to say, I got way more invested in every element of this game than I ever expected. It's a remarkable experience to cap the decade, and though it may not have scored big at the Game Awards, it's my personal favorite of 2019, one well deserving of a spot amongst the best of the decade. Number 9, Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. In a similar fashion to 3 Houses, my expectations were limited for Uncharted's 4th entry. The first Uncharted is a rough around the edges introduction to the cast. Uncharted 2 is a masterpiece of action-adventure that might score a spot in my top 10 best games of all time, and the 3rd entry is a great follow-up that has some of the series' most impressive set pieces. It's one of my favorite gaming trilogies, one that I believed was complete. I felt Uncharted 4 was unnecessary, and I was disappointed Naughty Dog went back for another sequel when they just hit a grand slam with a new IP in The Last of Us. I hoped they would knock our socks off with another new IP, and was saddened that we'd be getting a potential serving of franchise fatigue. Today's the day that I publicly eat crow, admit how wrong I was, and celebrate Uncharted 4 for the extraordinary game it is. Take everything that is excellent about Uncharted 2, build upon that with an improved stealth system from their time with The Last of Us, add in new dimensions to platforming with items such as the grappling hook, and craft a brilliant narrative that grounds itself more in reality. One that reflects on the challenges of retiring from a life of adventure. 4 years have passed, and Uncharted 4 still has a lock amongst the most visually impressive games of the decade. The game looks absolutely stunning in motion. Its visual fidelity adds a level of realism and tension to the action scenes that maximizes immersion. I loved getting more context on Nate's history. The expansion of his relationships with characters we've come to love in Sully and Elena is wonderful, and the introduction of new characters like Nate's brother Sam, the kick-ass Nadine, and that shitbird Rafe was expertly done. The long-term investment in the veteran characters plays well off the new additions, and with this being a clear finale, I was terrified every step of the way about how it would come to an end. I won't spoil it, but it has to be one of the most satisfying goodbyes of the decade. Though it may not be included in this entry, I have to shout out the criminally underrated epilogue, The Lost Legacy. Though Nate's absence is missed initially, Nadine and Chloe play off each other perfectly, and the design of its combat and puzzle segments rivals the series' finest. Naughty Dog proved to me over the decade that no matter how small the beginnings, with the right level of dedication and creativity, greatness is within anyone's grasp. That's a powerful message that I'll carry beyond gaming, and I'm eternally grateful to have it driven home in one final adventure with Nate and the crew. Number 8, Horizon Zero Dawn. Of the many iterations of the open world trope throughout the decade, the one that resonated with me the most was the world of Horizon. This is fueled on the surface by the combat and creative tools you have to approach it. Every single one of the fantastically designed mechanical creatures is a marvel to take on. They all have different strengths, weaknesses, and ask for diverse usage of your toolkit to maximize your offensive capabilities. The game gives complete freedom after the opening hours to explore the world to your heart's content. Even though the far reaches of the land were scaled for endgame, with clever use of your arsenal, there were ways to explore them by hacking machines for distractions or using traps, to name a few. As you explore, you're rewarded with experience, techniques, and more goodies to further boost the ever-expanding combat. Though I will be fair and admit that spamming arrows like a semi-auto rifle is definitely enough to get the job done, even if there are technically more optimal ways to handle each encounter. Ultimately though, having a valid range of tactics that all manage to be entertaining is one of the game's major strengths. The one downside is the prevalence of human enemies, which are serviceable but dull in comparison to the unique creatures of Horizon. Despite that minor fault, I chose to emphasize the excellent combat because it is the biggest aspect that gives it a slight separation in quality from similar open world games like Skyrim or The Witcher 3. Great combat and exploration aren't enough to push it this high alone, so allow me to give due credit to the narrative and the character at its center, Aloy. The narrative gets off to a slow start centered around Aloy as an outcast from the insulated nearby tribe shut off to the world around them. Her progressive rise to importance within the tribe is satisfying, but it's more rewarding to watch her grow as she adapts to the world around her. And in tandem, watch as the world changes in response to her and thereby the player's actions. It's difficult to go too deep without spoilers, but Aloy's development from a pariah to a heroine that has to carry the burden of saving a world that never wanted her is both heartbreaking and inspiring. One of my favorite scenes in any game this decade is this moment when she faces her tribe after getting a revelation from a machine they don't understand and revere as a deity. Her interaction and journey inside the machine has deep narrative implications, but the tribe's focus is narrowed solely on the supposed deity's acceptance of Aloy. This has them heel turn instantly after a life of shunning her to immediate worship of her as a prophet. Her reaction is priceless.
All praise Aloy, anointed of the Nora! All praise Aloy, anointed of the Nora! Up! All praise Aloy, anointed of the Nora!
First you shun me, now this? I will not be worshipped. I'm not your anointed. I don't belong to you. There's a whole world beyond your borders, whole tribes of people just as good as you. And it is all in danger. It's a world worth fighting for. Not just here, everywhere.
Most would be thrilled to finally be accepted, especially when she sought it desperately for such a large portion of her life. But in this moment, it's clear how small petty things like this are in the grander scheme of Aloy's expanded view of the world. It's one powerful moment among many that shape Aloy as one of the strongest protagonists of the decade. Admittedly, the game's emphasis on her does leave secondary characters a bit underdeveloped, and there are sometimes severe problems with lip sync that can pull you out of the experience. Though there's already been marked improvement with both of these issues being addressed in the Frozen Wilds DLC, a great addition that teases an exciting future for the burgeoning franchise. But as a singular game, from its combat to its world, to its narrative, to its phenomenal protagonist, Horizon Zero Dawn stands tall as a decade-defining experience. Number 7, Batman Arkham City. Down to the thinnest of margins, I give Arkham City the slight edge over its Batmobile-heavy counterpart. Night and City both boast fantastic narratives, thrilling, easy to pick up, hard to master combat, excellent stealth, phenomenal side missions, masterful use of the source material, and enjoyable puzzles. While they're both a bit over-bloated when it comes to the Riddler on that last note, the final deciding factors that push City above Night were the better boss battles, large amounts of high-quality combat and Predator maps that I spent ages perfecting, and not being beholden to the Batmobile. I do love its addition, but its overuse wore me down over the lengthy road to Nightfall, especially when it came to puzzles. A lot of Batman's gadgets felt underutilized at night, with so many of these brain teasers revolving around Bat's wheels. Shifting back to Arkham City, it was a clever evolution on Asylum that gave more freedom and exploration similar to Night, but kept the experience focused within a tighter space that held rein in design. The narrative surrounding the mystery of Protocol 10, the Joker's intertwined involvement, and being trapped within a concentrated city of criminals sets the stakes sky high from the very start and does not let up until the credits roll. The Arkham style of combat has gotten flack over the years, and while it can be very basic with punch, counter, and jump evade, the fun comes from using your gadgets and other variety to get large combo bonuses, testing the limits of your mastery. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how fun it is to glide around the city as well. It gets even more intense in night, but it is still enjoyable in city. I love both almost equally. Hell, I've even got love for Origins despite its flaws. The Arkham franchise is one of my favorites of the decade, and it has me waiting anxiously for Rocksteady to reveal their next project. No matter how long it takes, I'm grateful for their decade-defining experiences that set a new standard for what licensed games can achieve. Number 6, BioShock Infinite.
Booker, are you afraid of God?
No. But I'm afraid of you.
I'm tempted to transpose my monologue from the second part of the top 100 games of all time into this spot because it's an apt description of everything I love about the game. To my surprise, there were a few commenters who weren't happy about its inclusion, so I'm sure I've garnered a few eye rolls. I'm not sure when the line crossed from the siren calls a masterpiece at launch to many looking back with disgust in hindsight, but BioShock Infinite's quality never wavered for me. Poke holes at whatever plot holes you like, but the storytelling, flawless pacing, genius shift of setting, rich characters, dark themes, mind-bending twists, electrifying set pieces, and polarizing conclusion hit all the right notes for me. It was enhanced even further with the addition of Burial at Sea, building ties to the original with quality on par with the main game. Though the story is what sticks out most in my memory, I found the combat to be at a series high. Having a powerful vigor in one hand and a weapon in the other improves the fluidity of combat over its predecessor. Most of the arenas are designed with thoughtful precision, from skyhook rails to the varied stages to the tears Elizabeth can open to your benefit. There were many companion-centric journeys this decade, and Elizabeth easily ranks among the best of them. She can provide assistance by tossing you resources, but steers clear of danger, alleviating the classic tedium of the escort mission trope. A part of the human experience games with this feature well capture is a desire to protect those you care about. Even though Elizabeth is never in direct danger in combat, it feels as if your victory is that much more important with her safety potentially at stake. Her complicated relationship with Booker is tied deeply into the narrative, and their banter throughout the game is a constant source of intrigue. Outside of their relationship, the quirky Lutece twins are utilized perfectly. I love their role in peeling back the mysteries of the narrative. Eventually crossing into their own history as part of the extended lore through voxophones is fascinating. If you miss the immersive sim nature of the original that was shoved aside in favor of a more action-oriented experience, I can empathize with your disappointment. But despite my love for the original, the true successor to Irrational Games' rapturous masterpiece is my favorite entry in the franchise and easily claws its way toward the heights of the top 5. Number 5, Persona 5. JRPGs are a poorly represented section of my gaming repertoire. Though it isn't a genre I delve into often, the few I've played rival any game. That's never been more true than my time with Persona 5. Let's see. One of the best soundtracks of the decade that I still listen to daily. A unique sense of style that makes me wish I was even half as cool as the Phantom Thieves. A slice-of-life simulator that offers dozens of engaging tasks that enhance your ability to crawl through the dungeons of the metaverse. A combat system that showcases as much flair as the art style and has complex layers with resource management, party variety, and the many personas Joker can wield. Excellent dungeon and boss design that is given extra weight through the present narrative in the real world. A story that has a constant air of mystery between the past and present shifts, and is defined by the many characters you come to befriend, to your benefit in building deep relationships and gaining new skills. Every feature of the Persona 5 experience plays perfectly off the rest of it. This is another one of those games I binged relentlessly and finished in 2 weeks, spending more time scouring the metaverse than I did seeing the sun. Though I would argue the one flaw of the game is how difficult it is to manage near perfect quality and momentum throughout such a lengthy experience, with the 4th and 5th dungeons standing out as underwhelming in particular, it's a drop in the bucket in terms of the game's tremendous quality. I'd love to see remakes of 3 and 4 so I can experience more of what the franchise has to offer without buying a PS Vita or dealing with the potential jank that comes with age. But I'd be just as happy with a sequel. All I want is more Persona, and with Royal on the horizon, my schedule is bracing itself as I prepare to sink another 100 hours into Grand Theft Auto. Number 4, Mass Effect ? Even more than Batman Arkham City and Knight, deciding between Mass Effect 2 and 3 had me split until the final hour. That may come as a surprise considering the reception Mass Effect 3 received for its infamous ending, but the final 1% of the journey doesn't invalidate the 99% that came before it. Not that it's the picture of perfection. Kai Lang is a terrible villain, with a boss battle on Thessia that narrowly missed the worst of the decade list. It's scripted garbage devoid of entertainment, ending in a forced cutscene defeat that is incongruent with how hard he gets curb stomped. Shepard's contrived nightmare over a loss of a single person in the grand scheme of what he needs to achieve feels forced as well, even if it's meant to represent the immense burden he's under. And though I'm less harsh on it than most, the ending is rightfully panned for wrapping the series finale in a senseless triple-colored bow. But it has my favorite combat in the series. The enemy design is fantastic, and I love the balance between the strength of firearms and power cooldowns. I usually play as a Vanguard, and the satisfaction of flying around as a biotic god adds to the legend of Shepard. The gravity of the story carries a significant weight of the two games that come before it. Rallying a universe together creates a complex conundrum that is rewarding to resolve. It's a tightrope act of balancing conflicting motivations. You're forced to make key decisions in the best interest of assets against a genocidal threat in the Reapers, the heart of which is typically the fate of a major race at conflict with another. While shaping the future of a galaxy and saving it is monumental, the satisfying, if bittersweet conclusion to individual character arcs hits the hardest. Moments like shooting the shit with Garrus on the Citadel, Morden's ascent to face his destiny, and the liberation of the Quarians are unforgettable. In my first playthrough, I didn't have the Paragon values needed to resolve the Rannoch conflict peacefully, and the Quarians were eradicated as a result. Watching Tali throw her life away as a punctuation to everything lost broke me. It's one of the few times I can ever remember bursting into tears over a game, and I feel pathetic that while dictating this, I am tearing up a little bit. That's the power of Mass Effect. It comes from the world building, enjoyable combat, great mission structure, dialogue trees, and overarching narrative, but at its heart are the characters. Without Mass Effect 2's central focus on developing them, the hard-hitting moments in 3 wouldn't carry the same impact. Tali-Zora, Garrus, Liara, Morden, Legion, Grunt, Jack, Samara, Joker, EDI, Thane, the embodiment of booty. To me, their relationship with Shepard defines a Mass Effect experience. Mass Effect 2 focuses on building these bonds and giving background on each character in a grounded way that makes them feel lifelike. This slowly works toward a brilliant tactical mission that puts them all in a perilous situation you don't expect to come out of without losses. This plays deviously on your fondness for each of them built over the game's runtime, with any potential death feeling monumental in a way that frames the importance of the mission's success in the grander scheme. On the gameplay end, Mass Effect 2 shares the majority of 3's strengths. The Collector threat gave the conflict a personal vibe, the intro knocks your socks off, and the resulting forced tango with Shepard and the Elusive Man is a fascinating dynamic. Both games offer some of the best DLC of the decade in Lair of the Shadow Broker, Leviathan, and my personal favorite, Citadel. A complete tonal shift, you get a lighthearted doppelganger chase in between wild shenanigans with your comrades. It's fan service done in the best way possible. I feel a little guilty meandering between both games without taking a strong position that one is better than the other, but that's because Mass Effect to me isn't complete without its full experience. The trilogy to me is a single journey, even if they have divergent design philosophies and narrative focus. Even with it being outside the decade, Mass Effect 1 carries the same value, and I strongly oppose anyone who suggests it should be skipped over due to its age. But keeping to the rules and picking just one, 2 barely gets the edge. The gameplay is near its peak form, the character-driven story is marvelous, the world building continues to build off its predecessor, Lair of the Shadow Broker is magnificent, and the final hour is one of my favorite singular missions of all time. As a trilogy, Mass Effect is arguably my favorite gaming experience ever made. But even when isolated from its wonderful counterparts that make the experience whole, its second entry easily cements itself among the top 5. Number 3, God of War. In an era where established franchises are shoved under our noses at every turn through marketing that relies on brand awareness and less on establishing new media, God of War is a bit of an oddball. My negative undertone to the opening statement is suggesting that there's a mentality of playing it safe, with known properties to polarize the least number of fans possible, and regurgitate stale trends that provide popcorn entertainment, but little new value. In the face of this trend, God of War turned itself away from its hack-and-slash fury-fueled roots that put action above all else, and turned toward a tankier, more deliberate combat that put emphasis on storytelling through key characters. Not only was this soft reboot successful, the risk taken made a series that originally broke ground in the PS2 era shatter it even further in the modern day. Centered around a Kratos who has left his blood-soaked history behind to come to a new land and start a family, the game focuses on his relationship with his son after the passing of his mother and how Kratos intends to help him grow. It's an interesting dynamic to see a more subdued Kratos try to be a role model when he clearly carries complex emotions related to the misdeeds of his past. This relationship is shaped by a journey to scatter the ashes of Kratos' late wife and the roadblocks adding hardship to this goal. You meet many colorful characters throughout, many of which hold mystical power or even godhood within Norse mythology. Seeing Kratos interact as an unknown quantity to the gods of this land is really captivating. The combat is rich with unlockable special attacks, combos, and a badass axe you can toss and retrieve similar to Mjolnir, and Kratos' son Boy adds an interesting wrinkle to the formula with his varied archery and special moves. There are tons of creative enemies to test your might against, and though the variety is a little lacking, their design is excellent overall. The bosses, particularly the optional Valkyries, are phenomenal, the soundtrack is stellar, the narrative and characters involved are expertly written, the lore surrounding the universe is enchanting, the set pieces allowed through your godly powers are breathtaking, the endgame challenges provide great value, the RPG elements add a nice sense of progression, and the single moving camera throughout the game's runtime is an impressive treat to experience that adds to the immersion greatly. The game is clearly the first step in a new arc for Kratos and Atreus, and I can't wait to see where their adventures lead them. But this singular adventure stands tall atop a mountain of quality, well worthy of top 3 billing. Number 2, Bloodborne. It's not an exaggeration to say this game changed my life. Roughly 4 years ago was my first foray through Yharnam. I was so captivated by the experience that I felt desperate to share it with anyone I could, and it was that motivation that led me to create community rankings based around my favorite feature, its bosses. I've talked in depth about what I do and don't love about Bloodborne in more detail in the video shown on screen, which I'll link in the description, but allow me to gush anyway. The atmospheric shift from a beast-plagued land to something much more disturbing is masterful. The soundtrack is intense, haunting, and beautiful, as is the lore. The level design is on par with the greatest in any game. The boss designs are creative, challenging, and add great context to the world, and at its center is one of my all-time favorite combat systems. The speed of battle, unique features such as limb damage on bosses, transformation weapons making for some sick combos, and the weapons overall being focused down to a narrow, but genuinely differentiated roster resonated with me in a way that none of FromSoft's Souls systems did, though I will add that Sekiro resonated with me in the same way. Bosses like Ludwig and Lady Maria are behemoths of quality that set a high standard I hope to see achieved in any new boss I experience. Central Yharnam may be the best designed opening level of all time, with its varied enemy typings and placements teaching you the best ways to approach situations from the get-go, carefully crafted interconnectivity, great starter loot for those willing to face its toughest challenges, enemies that rapidly drop blood vials to ensure a smoother experience for newcomers, and 2 bosses opposite of one another, one a large beast, the other a humanoid hunter to give you context on what to expect throughout your journey, until the Lovecraftian shift that is. Demon's Souls was a fantastic introduction to this formula. Dark Souls brought it to a wider audience, and Bloodborne mastered it. Sekiro's existence proves FromSoft is still brimming with artistic value to create decade-defining experiences, and it has me anxiously awaiting Elden Ring. But no matter how many different interpretations we get on this formula, I always find myself refreshed and ready to go on another hunt through Yharnam. And my choice for the number 1 best game of the decade, The Last of Us. Naughty Dog's swan song to the 7th generation is a somber dive into the human experience. From the very opening used to frame the dire setting the majority of the game takes place in, there's an ominous discomfort from the world around you. This can range from the obvious threat in the game's zombie-like enemies to the motivations of the various survivors you meet throughout the fractured world. The game consistently asks how different personalities behave with their backs against the wall, and the response shapes not only the narrative, but adds relatable context, causing the player to consider how they would respond if forced into similar circumstances. Between the gripping narrative, the game is split into action and stealth sequences that rely on your ability to scavenge and utilize the scarce resources the world offers to cleverly approach each encounter. The enemy variety between different types of infected and humans that band against you are spread throughout excellently designed environments that enhance your strategic options. If there's anything the game has been panned for over the year by detractors, it would be its presence as the poster child of the playable movie that was popularized predominantly by Naughty Dog. The argument being the gameplay is a mediocre bridge to the next cutscene, and it's a disgrace to compare the likes of these wannabe films to the gameplay mastery of all-time greats like Mario, Final Fantasy, Zelda, and so on. My favorite evolution of the last decade is how far games have come not to match cinema, but to rival it in the unique way that it can tell its stories. Games have the unique opportunity to add player agency into a narrative experience and aren't beholden to a strict runtime. The Last of Us uses this advantage to the fullest extent. Take Ellie's escape attempt from David in the game's Winter chapter. The setup with Joel out of commission due to his recovery from a near-fatal injury leaves Ellie's fate in serious doubt when she's captured by a man whose intentions seem good on the surface, but gives a sense of something more sinister lurking beneath. Taking an active role as Joel wakes up to make his way to Ellie, slaughtering and torturing other survivors to preserve one of your own speaks volumes about the character as the player complicitly participates. Ellie's short run from David adds tension that is amplified brilliantly by the cuts to Joel's rampage in the pursuit of saving her. It all culminates in the final encounter with David, ending in a scene that shakes Ellie to her core and has Joel fully embrace how what was originally a job has now become something much greater. Perhaps the most direct example is in the final moments where Joel saves Ellie once again. You fight in an intense sequence that is one of the game's most challenging, a force that captures and amplifies player motivation to rescue Ellie. When you finally reach her, you can take her and run leaving the doctors alive, or can savagely butcher them in a fit of rage. A decision that is entirely left up to the player. Joel's selfish whim to keep Ellie alive, no matter the cost, may not even be something each player agrees with. And yet the game forces you to carry it out even if you minimize the bloodshed needed to succeed. The mixed emotions this can offer are unique to your own perspective as the game comes to its polarizing end. Moments like these go beyond entertainment and become emotionally charged experiences that leave me speechless as to where I stand on the actions I helped carry out. The gunplay that carries your end of this experience is polished to a brilliant shine. The strategies on the spectrum from pure stealth to guns blazing tactics have so many tools to optimize your chosen method, and the handful of puzzles throughout add a nice change of pace. Every bit of what we've mentioned to this point is solidified by some of the best acting performances in any game, and a soundtrack that flawlessly matches the emotional journey. When we talk about games that represent the medium the best, those that define the decade, century, or all time, what we value as individuals differs greatly. Gameplay, entertainment value, narrative, character development, graphical prowess, sound design, art direction, industry impact, replayability, value on the dollar. These are just some of the ways to judge the games we love or hate. The Last of Us is the game this decade that hits all of those notes at the highest level for me, and rises atop a foundation of excellence throughout this list that has my enthusiasm for what the next 10 years will bring flying through the roof. But of course, that's just my opinion. What are the games that define the decade for you? Let us know in the comments below. Consider leaving a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to see me strive to continue making content to match the decade of gaming excellence I'm anticipating. If you want to see me give an in-depth review of a new game from the decade, check out my review of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. It's my first try at a new format of video essays, and I think the depth of it may surprise you. Even if you don't go check it out, I want to thank you for watching today. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.